Okay, I'm with Nigel Farage, MEP and leader of UKIP, on the day that in West Midlands, UKIP party members receiving ballot papers through their doors, asking them to rank 7 candidates for next year's European elections for the West Midlands. Those 7 candidates have been selected by the party. Already there have been some concerns, which I'm going to refer to. But first of all, Nigel, how democratic is this process? Will members on the ground in the West Midlands decide the order of candidates? Generally, will they decide their candidates?
Well, ultimately, actually, it'll be the members of the whole of the party in England that will decide. So we have a full English ballot, a full Welsh ballot, a full Northern Irish ballot. Yeah, I mean, the argument has been over the shortlisting. You know, we had about 200 people that applied to be MEPs. Having already passed a set of criteria, 200 got through to that stage, and that had to be whittled down to a shortlist of 60 for England. So, you know, there are quite a lot of unhappy people. The difficulty is when you give your members the opportunity to vote on things, what do? Do you give them a ballot paper that resembles a sheet of wallpaper because there are so many names on it, or do you try and shortlist it down? And that's the route we've chosen. To be honest with you, shortlisting is something that every party has to do. Now, it has led to some arguments, and I suppose the biggest argument of any region in the country has been here in the West Midlands.
The current West Midlands MEP, Mike Nattrass, has sought an injunction and a legal review into the selection of candidates. In particular, he was unhappy with an aptitude test, which was partly used to select candidates. There was not just an interview, but a written test and a public speaking test. He says that discriminated against people. I think his further accusation is that you personally have chosen a mechanism to pick your favourite candidate.
Well, I mean, there are 2 points there, and there's one big point, and the others are rather more specific. Let me deal with the big point. I have had nothing to do with this, and I'll tell you why. The selection process we used in 2004 and 2009 was a process that I personally was the architect of, engineered and saw through, and it did not lead to us having good crops of MEP candidates in 2004 and 2009. Too many people have let us down. Now, you could argue, in a sense, for a very new small party, it's not surprising that you make some mistakes on the way to growing up to being a bigger party. But as I'd been the architect of something that had so clearly failed, I said at the outset of this, sort of 2 years ago, I want nothing to do with it. I want nothing to do with it. And therefore, the chairman of the party, the national executive of the party, and outsourcing and using headhunters and recruitment consultants have got on with a process on a set of criteria laid down by our national executive.
Do you deny you've had any personal involvement?
I do, and I have had no involvement in this whatsoever. So I was a bit shocked last week, to read that there was an accusation that somehow I'd fiddled this or fudged this. I've had nothing to do with it. And the second point I would make is this, that, I've known Mr. Nattrass a very long time, and I've certainly had my ups and downs with him. That's life, that's politics. But Mike has always been a very loyal, hard-working believer in the UKIP cause, and I have no reason to wish to do him down, nor does the party have any particular reason to wish to do him down. But, and I've obviously looked at this, he went through a series of tests and interviews that did not match up to the criteria that were laid down. He took us to court. We went to the High Court in Birmingham over this, and the judge looked at it, and the judge said that not only was the process that UKIP had used to shortlist candidates fair, but that it was set up and designed to be fair.
And yet Mike Nattrass is absolutely adamant that you have a personal hand in the selection of candidates. He accuses you of concocting something against him because you had a fallout several years ago.
Well, he's just wrong.
Joined an alliance of what many people regard to be a ragtag bunch of right-wing extremists in the European Parliament.
He's just wrong. I mean, he's just plain wrong. As I say, I didn't have any part in the interview that he did with the selectors for this, but if these are the sort of arguments he was making in front of the selectors, then maybe that's why he's had a problem. I don't know, but I just repeat the point. I've had nothing to do with this.
We've had other people in the party and close to the party, informally close to the party, including the MEP Nikki Sinclair, who has previously accused you of being Stalinist in running
well,
the party.
if only.
Also, the former chief executive of the party says this party is too personal.
Perhaps,
It's all
perhaps,
about, his words, it's all about Nigel Farage.
perhaps if I had been more Stalinist and if I had kept more control, we'd have fewer of these problems. But actually, I've had 2 goes at being leader of UKIP. In the first period, which was from the middle of '06 to the end of '09, I was heavily involved, not just in the politics, but in the running of the party. And I walked away from it because it was just too much for any one person to take. I came back to being leader at the end of 2010. I said to the membership, vote for me, give me a second term as leader, and I will lead the party politically, but I won't run it and manage it. And I have devolved everything since 2010 in terms of the running of the party to different people. Some of those people have come up to the mark and some haven't.
Isn't part of the problem a lack of transparency in the selection procedure then? Many people inside and outside the party saying you've got a firm Stalinist grip on the selection procedure. You're completely denying that. Is there a lack of transparency?
No. I mean, it couldn't, as I say, we've been through the High Court on this. We've been to the High Court in Birmingham, where a senior judge has given us a glowing reference in terms of how this has all been approached. I have not attended a single selection meeting. I haven't had a hand in drawing up the rules. I haven't been a part of this. And anybody that wants to come out and say that I have, well, they're just choosing to ignore the facts.
What's the process now then in terms of the West Midlands slate? As we said, ballot papers arrived at members'
ballot papers
today. What's next and when will we know who the 7 candidates are for the West Midlands?
Ballot papers have arrived across England today. The members
We should know the candidates, those 7 people today then.
Oh, you'll know who the 7 people are. That's no problem at all.
Yeah.
I think our members have 17 or 18 days in which to vote and get their envelopes back to the Electoral Reform Society. You see, again, we're doing everything we can to try and make sure this process is fair and that it can't be influenced, but no doubt some will still say that it's rigged. And we'll be announcing the results in the last week of September. So, you know, the members are going to have a say. The members are going to decide.
The members will only have a say on the order of the 7 candidates.
That's right, but not in who the 7 should be. And there's no political party that does it any different. You know, if there's a by-election in one of the central Birmingham constituencies, let's say a Labour MP, dies or resigns or whatever, the Labour Party, local Labour Party, will have to choose who their candidate is. There'll be hundreds of people that want to be that MP. The national parties, in all cases, have to reduce that down to a sensible list. As I say, I haven't designed this process. It's slightly different to the one that I was in charge of in '04 and '09. I think they've done as much as they possibly can to get it right. People are always going to be upset, and I'm sorry that Mike Nattrass has been upset. You know, and frankly, I was surprised. That was the decision that was reached, but it was.
Another reasonably high-profile West Midlands person who missed out on the selection this time round is John Gaunt.
I know.
He's the former Sun columnist and Talk Sport shock jock, as many people call him. He's often described in publicity as a personal favourite of yours. Is John Gaunt a personal favourite of yours?
Well, I've always liked John Gaunt. I've always thought that one of the things that John did on radio, television and through the newspapers was he was able to put the point of view from somebody who had not had the best start in life. You know, he'd been through foster homes, he'd been through difficulties, he'd overcome all of that and been a huge success. And you know, it's funny because if you look at politics and media and so much of the people who kind of dominate British society today, not everybody, but a huge number of them have come from very privileged and very easy backgrounds. So having someone like John there speaking up for ordinary people, I think is a very valuable thing. And he's done it very well. And I have to say, just to disprove the former questions that you asked, that I recruited John to UKIP over lunch in Brussels. He'll tell you the story. We had a couple of drinks and talked about life. And I said, John, you know, if you really want to change things for working people in this country, UKIP is the only means by which we're actually going to get control back from the EU, stop the unrestricted flow of migrant workers, pricing our own people out of jobs. And John accepted that, joined, has taken part and been active, applied for selection, and he hasn't made that shortlist.
Would you rather have seen him make the shortlist?
Now you're now asking me to contradict my own selection panel and to imply that the High Court judge wasn't right. And I'm not going to do that. But what I will do is say this. Firstly, I feel just a touch embarrassed by this because I'd encouraged the guy to have a go and he hasn't made the shortlist. So personally, I feel embarrassed by it. And secondly, doesn't that prove the point? This isn't a Farage stitch-up. You know, all those people in response to Mike Nattrass not being listed who make that argument. It is utterly disproved by what's happened to John Gaunt.
What's next for John Gaunt then? Some people are tipping that he might get a PR or press job in UKIP. Is that true?
I don't know.
Does he have any paid role in UKIP at the moment?
He has no paid role in UKIP at the moment, and he never has. Let's see what the future brings. I'm not ruling anything in or anything out. As I say, you know, I do think John actually reaches out to an audience out there who see him as a champion and as one of their own.
Could you might you try and pull some strings for this personal favourite of yours in future in terms of any election process?
Well, I think I've made it clear that my days of overseeing the UKIP selection process are over. I've done some things right in politics, I've done some things wrong in politics, and my track record's poor here, so no.
And many people in the West Midlands might ask you whether you really ought to be regarding John Gaunt as a liability. His track record isn't great. So, in all fairness, he was sacked from TalkSport for calling somebody a Nazi, leading to public fall from grace. But before then, a Broadcast Complaints Commission ruled that he had threatened somebody with a baseball bat live on air. In a Guardian interview, he talked about once beating up pensioners who dared to look at him the wrong way. More recently, his own PR company in work for the Police Federation has come unstuck with a campaign against Andrew Mitchell that fell flat on its face. Many people would say that John Gaunt's track record is doomed to failure if he was ever an elected.
Yes, no, they would. You're right. Of course, you're right. I mean, you know, I've heard that argument. I see the arguments from both sides, as far as John is concerned. I mean, you know, it's interesting. If you look at high-profile media figures, they are controversial people by nature, and like the rest of us, they get some things right and they get some things wrong. You know, that's the same for John. But look, you know, I've made my position on John clear. I know the guy. I think he has a role to play because he does speak up, you know, for ordinary folk that are struggling out there. But I know he has his detractors too.
John Gaunt is somebody who believes in banning the burqa.
I know he does.
Do you believe in banning the burqa?
No.
You don't?
No, I don't think. I don't.
I don't. Reported that that's your position.
No, it's widely thought and reported that it's not my position. That the previous leader of the party, Lord Pearson, felt that, like the French and like the Belgians, we should go down the route of banning the burqa, you know, being worn walking through the streets of Birmingham, for argument's sake. I don't really want a government that tells us what we can and can't wear walking down the high street. Now, does that mean that I don't think there is a very serious issue about integration in Britain's cities? Of course I do. I think it's, you know, it is one of the great social challenges that we face, and I personally think that we must do all we can to stop mass immigration into Britain now, and it's perfectly clear that a massive majority of the public, including, you know, a huge number of the ethnic minorities, want an end to mass immigration because they can see that it's dislocating communities further. But I think it's beholden upon us now to do everything we can to have an integrated society.
How on earth can you control that? The Conservatives came to power in 2010 promising to get the number of immigrants down with restrictions on EU immigration. But of course there's free flow of movement within the EU. Just in the last month we've seen immigration numbers rise again.
Yeah.
False
well,
promise.
I think
false promise being sold to.
I think in a sense, you're right to say that, because look at what happened on May the 2nd. May the 2nd this year, the English County Council elections, and UKIP stunned everybody. You know, we got 23% of the national vote and 25% of the vote where we stood. And put it in perspective, the Conservatives got 25% and Labour got 29%. So it was almost a three-way tie in terms of the numbers of votes in this country. People were astonished, and they knew that one of the big reasons people voted UKIP is because they want to be able to vote for a non-racist, non-sectarian party that actually believes it's about time we got a serious grip on this issue. Since then, Clegg, Miliband and Cameron have all talked tough on immigration, but really your question leads us to, I think, one of the biggest issues of British politics that we face, and it's this: we cannot control immigration into Britain all the while we stay a member of the European Union. And to pretend that you can, frankly, is conning the public, and I think they're waking up to that. You
say UKIP is a non-racist party, and yet I assume you'd prefer, for instance, that women don't wear the burqa. Is that the case?
Well, I'd prefer that everybody that lived in this country and that was part of this country spoke together, in the same language, because that's increasingly becoming a problem, particularly in parts of London, a very, very serious problem. And I would prefer that we all integrated. Now look, we have Jewish communities who wear Jewish dress, big communities in Manchester and North London who, whilst they observe their own faith, are fully parts of society. So, I don't think it's for us to be prescriptive and say what people should and shouldn't wear, but it is wholly desirable that our kids can speak the same language and play football in the street together, and that's what we want to get to.
Do you prefer that women don't wear the burqa?
I'm just not getting involved in this. I'd prefer that we were able freely to speak to each other and engage with each other.
With that kind of controversy, doesn't it make picking up votes in urban areas in the West Midlands like Birmingham and Coventry very difficult?
No.
You have high levels of third, fourth generation immigrants.
Yeah, they do,
And new immigrants.
And in many cases, those third and fourth generation immigrants feel, and I meet them every day, and they feel completely part of our society. It's the Mo Farah answer, isn't it? Actually, you can be first generation and feel it. People who've made a conscious decision to come and live in this country, take a British passport, become part of society, want their kids to grow up British. Of course they do. And it's not about religion, it's not about class, and it's not about race. So a lot of those people are actually going to vote UKIP. Of course they are.
The problem is, doesn't the party have a credibility problem when even the former leader, Professor Alan Sked,
I'm not
former
answering.
UKIP leader, calls the party under your leadership extraordinarily right-wing.
I'm sorry.
Nobody
who listens to this interview or sees this interview will have ever heard of Dr. Alan Sked. He was leader of UKIP donkeys years ago and didn't make the carry. I just regard his comments as being irrelevant. What I do take seriously, very seriously, is when we find people inside UKIP who've got into UKIP who do actually hold extreme and abhorrent views. That I do take seriously. Have we had a problem with that? Every party has had a problem with that. And what I've tried to do, unlike Labour particularly, is I've said that anybody that's ever been part of the BNP cannot even be a member of UKIP. So I've tried to protect us from being infiltrated by other groups who would come in and try to push extreme arguments. I want no business with that.
The big test electorally now for UKIP is to how to translate those successes in council elections this year, not just into the European elections next year, but beyond to the likely 2015 general election. I interviewed many people, UKIP candidates on the ground, who said there were no troops on the ground, there were no boots on the ground to help people on the doorstep. They were fighting a lost battle. Firstly, the party have a problem if it wants to do well in 2015 with troops on the ground and the quality of candidates as well.
Yeah, of course it does. I'd be a liar not to say that wasn't the case. And I tell you, Nick Clegg and David Cameron and even Ed Miliband would tell you the same thing if they were being honest. Party memberships are collapsing in this country. The Liberal Democrats are down to about 40,000 members. It's rumoured that the Conservatives are now below possibly 100,000, and Labour, which in the early years of Blair was up through 400,000 members, is certainly half that, and maybe even lower. So all the parties are struggling to actually find activists, and the average age of memberships of the parties have been going up. So there are huge problems with this. I would just say this to you, that in the last 12 months, UKIP's membership has gone up by 50%. So we're now through the figure of 30,000 members. Yes, we're not as big as the others, but we're getting there. And I think the calibre and quality of candidates is improving. It is work in progress, of course it is. But there are parts of the country, there are parts of East Anglia, there are parts of the southeast of England, where now, if we fight a county council seat for argument's sake, there will be, a good number of activists that'll be out there campaigning on the doorsteps. In the West Midlands, I'm going to Telford this evening to do a public meeting in Telford. In Telford, we've now got over a handful of town councillors who've been elected. We've got a couple of district councillors who've been elected, and a membership that is growing very, very quickly. That's an example. There are parts of Staffordshire where UKIP has won county council seats in the past. So there are parts of the West Midlands, Worcestershire too, there are parts of the West Midlands in which we're getting to that level. What our problem, and it's the same for everybody, we have got to face the challenge that in Birmingham next year, and in Coventry next year, and in Walsall next year, there are going to be not just European elections, but local elections too. And we've got to transform ourselves in the heart of the West Midlands into being a serious player.
Now, the history of local politics obviously tells us that in local elections, mid-term, people register a protest vote against the government. But come the general election, the topology is completely different, the voting is completely different. How do you challenge that?
Well,
that your vote
yeah, I mean,
not translate
the first thing I would say,
success
is this: that we haven't had a phenomenon like UKIP in England before. We have in Scotland, we have in Wales, we have in Northern Ireland. We haven't had anything like UKIP ever before in this country. So it's very difficult, just on the basis of history, to predict what might happen. My view is this. My view is that we have to do phenomenally well in the European elections and perhaps even win them across the UK. At the same time, we have to build up clusters of local council success, as the Liberal Democrats did under Ashdown in the 90s. And if we do that, we'll have the momentum behind us, and we can then seriously challenge for seats at Westminster in 2015. But I can't really answer your question, honestly, until this time next year. Because this time next year, I shall know how we've done in the May elections.
What's next for you personally, Nigel Farage? Clearly you'll be standing as an MEP next year.
I will, yeah.
Do you have any intention of standing for the general election in 2015?
Well, I mean, what's next for me is to carry on with my crusade, my sort of Billy Graham tour of the country, trying to inspire people into saying, look, we don't hate Europe, but we do believe Britain should be self-governing. We don't dislike anybody from any part of the world, but we do believe that getting some grip on mass immigration matters, and I should go on pushing that and many other issues. And then, as I say, let's see how we do in May next year. Let's see whether the party can improve in terms of its people and its professionalism and all of that.
I'm asking about you personally.
And I accept all of that. And I will then, next summer, announce what I'm going to do. And if I was a betting man, I'd put money on me running for a seat in the Westminster elections in 2015. Yes.
Right. And if that fails, you don't get into Parliament in 2015. These are hypothetical.
These are very hypothetical.
There are rumours in UKIP circles that were you to do the full 4-year term as an MEP, you will then retire because you were elected as an MEP in 1999. That gives you 18 years. Now that is a threshold at which you qualify for full pension accruals, and you could walk away with everything Europe would have to offer in 2017.
Well, I haven't.
Might you retire in?
Whether
that's true or not.
I can assure you that as somebody who's got young children as well as old children, the idea of living purely off a pension from 2016-17 wouldn't be very appealing.